Each time a new Hearthstone expansion comes out, we get to see the cards before we actually get to play with them. And a lot of people start reviewing cards thinking that they're going to be extremely strong, and some of them are extremely overrated. Some people will claim that this is going to be the best card of all time due to something specific, maybe its stats or effect, but it makes you think on what is the most overrated cards when it comes to Hearthstone. When we go to GVG, we might see what is the most overrated card of all time, which is Trogzor the Earthinator. This was a 7-mana 6/6 neutral legendary. Whenever your opponent cast a spell, summon a Burly Rockjaw Trog. This card was extremely overhyped because it seemed like if you got to play this card, the game was virtually over, because how was your opponent supposed to deal with all of these Burly Rockjaw Trogs? Every single time you casted a spell to deal with one, other ones would get stronger, and you had to focus on Trogzor first, otherwise the generation would just keep on continuing. There were a couple problems with this. One, if your opponent had any form of minion that could deal with Trogzor, the card was absolutely useless, and often it felt like you could just play one spell to deal with Trogzor and then the generation just completely stopped. And quite early on in the expansion, we saw that this card was not nearly as strong as people thought it was going to be, where Dr. Boom was the premier 7-drop in the expansion. Now, this kind of set a trend for a lot of people overhyping cards in multiple expansion, and we definitely saw a lot of people get a lot of cards wrong when we actually got to play with them. Another great example of this is from Descent of Dragons with Frizz Kindle Roost, a 4-mana 5/4 neutral legendary. Battlecry reduced the cost of dragons in your deck by 2. The idea of this card was simple. You play it on turn 4, it has decent stats, and the rest of the game you're basically mana cheating dragons out. But here's the problem. If you didn't draw this exactly on turn 4, this card felt like it was way too slow and quite often just literally useless. It also kind of forced you to play dragons in your deck, and sometimes you were playing too many, which means your deck was too slow and therefore you would just lose because you just didn't do anything in the early game. Another great example of an overrated card was from Ongoro with Likari Sacrifice, which was the Warlock quest. This card looked to be the best quest from Ongoro due to the fact that Warlock had good discard cards, and the effect that you got from this was a never-ending onslaught of imps. This card looked really good on paper, but in actual practice, the biggest problem with this quest was how late you actually got it finished. Usually you would get it at turn 7 at the earliest, and even then you had to spend 5 mana to play the portal, which means you had to run a bunch of discard cards in your deck to finish this quest as fast as possible, which already made your deck worse, and the effect was so lackluster that it made the quest not even worth it. And when you compare this quest to a lot of the other quests that ended up seeing a lot of play, it just makes kind of a lot of sense that this quest was just not that great. Another great example of quests was with Jungle Giants, which was the Druid quest, which was to summon 5 minions with 5 or more attack. The reward for this was Barnabas, which made every one of your minions in your deck cost 0 mana, and with Druid having a ton of ramp in the early game to get to a mana point where you could start playing these 5 mana minions, this seemed like it was going to be rather strong. But here's the problem with quests. You basically start with one less card in your hand because you need to keep the quest in order to use it on turn 1. But obviously, if you're starting with one less card in your hand, it means you have one less chance to get ramp, which means your deck is going to be that much slower, and because you have to play a bunch of big minions to complete this quest, you probably die. And that's where a lot of the overrated cards come from, is the effect of the card. It seems like it's a bigger deal than it actually will be in the game. In other words, a more flashy effect feels like it's going to be stronger than it actually will be. Speaking of a flashy effect, Midas Lazula is a perfect example of this. Midas Lazula was a 3-mana 3/2 priest legendary that had the battle cry to discover a copy of a card in your opponent's hand. Midas Lazula had a really cool effect where you got to see information of your opponent's hand, and a lot of people thought this was going to be an extremely powerful effect. And not only did you get the information of your opponent's hand, you also got a copy of a card in your opponent's hand, which could be pretty great. It was also not that bad of a minion, but it turns out getting the knowledge of your opponent's hand is not that great, and getting a card from your opponent's deck doesn't really help you because they're putting it into their deck because it's good, where you're just getting an extra card. Chameleos was also another card just like this, a 1-mana 1/1 priest legendary minion. Each turn this is in your hand, transform it into a card your opponent is holding. Just like Midas Lazula, this card was overvalued because a lot of people thought getting information about your opponent's hand was going to be an extremely big deal, but this card was overhyped just as much as Midas Lazula because it turned out that holding a card in your hand just to get information of what your opponent has was extremely lackluster. Another thing people seem to overhype is the amount of value a single card can get, and Revenge of the Wild is an absolutely perfect example of this. Revenge of the Wild was the highest rated card from Rostakon's Rumble solely due to the fact that it would be an extremely powerful card to trade into a bunch of minions and getting all your beasts back. But the issue with this card is that you needed a big board of beasts to do so, and a lot of the time you just couldn't get that with Hunter. Now, this isn't to say that this card is bad, but it definitely was overhyped because everyone wanted this card to be this insane tempo swing and you can clear boards with it, but this card ended up being pretty mediocre, not insane like everyone envisioned. Speaking of a card that everyone thought was going to be insane, the Marsh Queen quest from Ongoro for Hunter. Fun fact about this card is that it single-handedly made Life Coach, an ex-pro Hearthstone player, quit Hearthstone. This quest gave you the reward of Queen Carnassa, which shuffled 15 Raptors into your deck, which each of them were 1 mana 3/2 and draw a card. The reward for this quest obviously seemed insane on paper, but the biggest issue with this quest is that you had to play a bunch of 1-drops to finish it. This kind of had the reverse effect of the Druid quest, where your deck was just so low value that it didn't really matter if you got a bunch of 1-cost 3/2 draw a card, when your deck just didn't really do anything in the late game. That's another thing a lot of people overvalue, is just strictly tempo, and no better card showcases this than Scavs Cutter Butter. Scavs Cutter Butter was a 4 mana 3/3 rogue card which had a combo the next 2 cards you play this turn cost 3 less. People were absolutely losing their minds because they thought that rogue could cheat out a bunch of cards and do insane things all with this one card. But it turned out that this was actually not nearly as good as people thought it was, because this card just felt so awkward to play in a lot of rogue decks. A lot of rogue decks run a lot of low cost cards because rogue wants to be efficient in doing what it wants to do. That means that Scavs at most was discounting 6 mana, but that never really happened. And you also have to take in the fact that not only do you have to spend 4 mana to make Scavs effect work, but you also have to combo with it. So it's almost like you weren't really cheating any mana to begin with. This card also wasn't bad, but extremely overhyped and just was not the monster that everyone thought it was going to be. Now, sometimes a card looks extremely strong, but the meta doesn't allow it to see play. No card showcases this better than Cornelius Rome, a 6 mana 4/5 minion. At the end and start of both players' turn, you draw a card. Now, this card, in my opinion, is still extremely good, but the issue was in the meta of United and Stormwind, the game was just too fast and there was no need to draw cards because you would have just died. Now, a lot of people expected this card to be extremely strong, me included, and the reason for this is because the effect for 6 mana was extremely powerful and it can snowball a game out of control in your favor, but there's no need to draw cards when you just end up dying to a bunch of nonsense. Another effect that people really overhype is discounts and mana cheating. And don't get me wrong, mana cheating is a huge part of Hearthstone right now, and it is usually really good, but sometimes people overvalue it just a little bit. And a great example of this is Dragon Consort from Blackrock Mountain. At the time, a 5 mana 5/5 dragon that discounts the next dragon by 2 mana looked like it was going to be an extremely powerful effect. Now, this card seemed really good because if you discount a early Ysera, it could be game winning, but it turns out when you're discounting a late game card, it doesn't really matter because removal always costs the same thing. And the later the game goes, the more likely they are to have the removal, so getting an early big dragon didn't actually matter at all. Let me know what you think are some extremely overrated cards, and if you want me to do underrated, I could do that as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe and like it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. You look fantastic.